Hi, I'm Paul Spiteri, and I'm going to be reading from A Rough Night for the Queen. This is a biography that Philip Jose Farmer wrote about Sir Richard Francis Burton back in the 1950s. It was first published in 2006 as part of the collection Pearls from Peoria, but this year Meteor House has produced two editions, a paperback and a hardback, of standalone of the whole piece. New artwork, new introductions, some photos, a nice package of a book. Um, I'm going to be reading from the PDF. The actual book is still at the printers at the moment, so forgive me for referring to an electronic copy. Hopefully I'll be able to do it fairly seamlessly. And also I must apologise, I'm doing this outside in my garden. It just felt like too nice a day not to take advantage. So there might be a bit of background noise. I can hear some birds and a pheasant over on my right hand side in the undergrowth. So hopefully this will be a good enough recording. Okay, so I'm going to be reading from fairly early in the book, and it describes probably Burton's most famous exploit, searching for the source of the River Nile. So the expedition party has recently arrived at Berbera. They've come together, they've got a camp, so that's where I'm going to pick up the reading. Okay. At sundown, Burton inspected the camp. As he strode about swaggering, he made an impressive figure. He was a broad, muscular man, about 6 feet tall, with jet black hair and eyes. He carried himself proudly and moved abruptly like a startled panther. His eyes were unusual, described by friends and enemies alike as being piercing, stinging, hypnotic, unfriendly, savage. He sported a dragoon-thick moustache, and his jaw looked hard and strong enough to bite an iron bar in two. He radiated strength and authority, so that any visiting native would have no trouble in picking out the leader from the 4 white men. All seemed to be well. The camp had been pitched on a rocky ridge close to a creek, about 3/4 of a mile from the city. Lieutenant Stroyan's tent was on the extreme right, Lieutenant Speake's on the left, and in the middle was the roti, a sepoy's tent, supported by 2 uprights and a transverse and open at both ends. Burton and Lieutenant Hearn slept there. The horses and mules were tethered in the rear, and the camels in the front. At night, 2 sentries were posted, and these were kept from sleeping by regular visits from the native and English officers. Suddenly, shots were heard from behind the tents. Burton raced to find the cause of the commotion and was told by the guards that they had fired over the heads of 3 horsemen. They were afraid that these were the scouts of a raiding party, and they tried and failed to scare them off. Sharply, Burton said, "From now on, don't do any bloody shooting unless you know it's absolutely necessary. And then don't shoot over them, shoot their bloody heads off." After giving this characteristic order, he questioned the 3 Bedouin. They replied that the local sheikh of the Aban tribe was in the neighbouring port with 4 ships. He intended to occupy Berbera when it was deserted and build a fort there. The 3 had come to see if the ship in the harbour carried building materials. Laughingly, they asked if Burton feared danger from them. All believed their story and went to bed without any uneasiness. Sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, the Balyas, the native commander, ran into the tent, shouting that the enemy was on them. Burton leaped out of bed and listened for just a second. The rush of men outside sounded like a stormy wind. It was evident that they were outnumbered. He called for his sabre and ordered Hearn to find out just how many the attackers were. Then, with a Colt in one hand, Hearn ran to the rear and left of camp, where the most noise seemed to be. He looked for the mercenaries and found a few. The others had leaped from bed and run off into the darkness, not even waiting to pick up their weapons. Hearn fired twice into the assailants without being able to see if he'd struck anybody. Finding himself alone, he ran back to the tent. Something hard struck his legs and sent him sprawling on the ground. The tent's peg rope. As he started to rise, a Somali leaped from the darkness, his war club lifted. Lieutenant Hearn fired, and the man crumpled. When he burst into Burton's tent again, he found Speke also there, for the captain had aroused him. Stroyan was nowhere to be seen. Speke had been awakened by the musket fire, but he thought it was a normal false alarm, warning thieves away and tried to go back to sleep. Then hearing the clubs beating on the sides of his tent and the shuffle of naked feet, he ran into Burton's tent. The Somali, 350 strong, attacked the 3 Englishmen and the Balyus, the only native who had not run away. They swarmed outside the tent, trying to nerve themselves with fierce screams. Javelins flew into the opening of the tent, and long heavy daggers were cast at the occupants' legs. Burton, armed only with his sabre, ordered Hearn to his right and Speke to his left. Each had one pistol, which they fired until their ammunition was gone. So close were the spearsmen, a man fell at every shot. Hearn rose to search for his powder horn in the rear of the tent. "Damn, I can't find it," he called out. Then, "There's usually some spears tied to the centre pole." He ran back to Burton. "One of them is slashing through the rear of our tent. They'll be on our backs in a moment." Just as he ran out, the tent sagged, for its ropes had been cut in the hope that the English roomie would be caught within, where they could be stabbed like fish in a net. Burton, knowing this trick, had ordered them out. He led them straight into the whole mob. Just outside the entrance were about 20 Somali, kneeling and crouching behind their shields, their spears held out before them. They looked like black-faced ghosts, with their ostrich feathers atop their bleached yellow-white hair, and their white robes edged with scarlet. Burton rushed into the 20, his sabre swinging. Clubs swung at him and seemingly bounced off his hard muscles, or else were turned aside by the steel blade. He smashed through canvas-covered shields, then, unexpectedly, drove the point into their throats. These savages had never heard of thrusting with a sword. They were dead before they had caught on. And many of them suddenly found their spears and clubs had dropped out of useless hands. Burton used the manchette, a trick of swordplay which had helped earn him the title of Maître d'Armes from the French. A cut at the forearm, then an unexpected backhand drawing, the sharpened back edge of the sabre slicing the nerves and tendons of the enemy's wrist. Speke and Hearn were swallowed in the horde. Burton was left alone. Thinking that he saw Stroyan's body lying on the sand, he cut his way towards it. Meanwhile, the Balyas, who could not use his spear because of a sore right thumb, was trying to help Burton out. His efforts were limited to pushing him along. Burton, thinking he was an enemy, turned to cut him down. "For the sake of Allah, it is I, your friend," cried the Balyas. Burton halted the sword at the top of his swing. Instantly, a Somali, who had been lurking at the edge of the fight for just such a chance, stepped forward and drove his broad-headed spear through Burton's cheeks. Then he turned and fled, escaping the avenging cut at him. Though the blade had knocked out 4 of his back teeth and driven into his palate, Burton fought on, the spear hanging from the side of his face. The savages, though wild to gain the glory of killing this great warrior and of soaking their ostrich crests in his blood, could not stand before his fury. Within a minute he was in the darkness, where some of his mercenaries and servants offered to go back with him. But as he approached the enemy once again, they faded off into the night, leaving him alone. Meanwhile, the Balyas reappeared. Burton ordered him to go to the native boat in the harbour and tell it to wait for them. The rest of the time before dawn he spent in wandering about, looking for his 3 companions, the spear still sticking through both cheeks. Finally, his pain and fatigue were so great that he had to lie down. At dawn he rose and went to the head of the creek, where an armed party from the boat found him and carried him to safety. Fate, that so often had and would cast events to trip him up, had this time saved him. For had the boat left the night before, as they intended, he would have been slaughtered by the Somali in the daylight. Stroyan's badly mutilated corpse was found later. Except for some bruises from war clubs, Hearn was uninjured. Speke was captured and stabbed many times in the chest and thigh, but he escaped. I'm going to stop there. I think that's a good place to stop. Phil describes many more adventures that Burton had, both before and after the scene I've just read about. It's an exciting book. It's not a particularly long book, but it's a masterful example of Phil's ability to write so well and so concisely. And it's a great read. And, you know, Burton's life was almost fiction. And I hope if you do buy this book, you enjoy it as much as I have. Thank you for listening to me. Goodbye.